B. Today's Daf is Ayin Hey, and we're in the middle of 74B, Ayin Dalet Amid Base. And the Gemara is talking about the obligation to salt meat in order to remove the blood. It has an alternative where if you roast it on fire, fire would then release the blood and take it out. And that's another way of making your meat kosher, eating meat, even if it hadn't been salted, by putting it directly on the fire. And the Gemara was talking about that even if there's something in between, food in between the meat that needs to be salted and the fire itself, it'll still suck it out, as it were. And just as the fire can take the blood out of the meat and then into the next food, it also will take it through. And the Gemara made a distinction between what type of flour it was, if it was a thicker dough or a finer dough, whether or not the blood that comes out of the meat into the dough would also be able to be extracted. The Gemara continues with a series of machlokas between Rav Acha and Ravina in regards to roasting meat in order to extract the blood. So Rav Acha and Ravina, and this is in the middle of Ayin Dalet Amid Beis. Rav Acha and Ravina b'chol haterakula, Rav Acha l'chumra Ravina l'kula. Whenever we have a discussion in halacha between Rav Acha and Ravina and all of the Gemara, Ravina is usually the more lenient, and Rav Acha is the more strict. And sometimes the Gemara won't tell us who it is. The Gemara will just say, Rav Acha and Ravina had a discussion. One said this and one said that. As a rule, Ravina was the lenient one. And the halacha is like Ravina when he is more lenient. Besides for in these three matters, the Rav Acha l'kula Ravina rechumra, that in these Rav Acha was strict, was lenient, and Ravina was strict. And here too, the halacha is lenient, like Rav Acha, who is lenient in this way. So it's always the more lenient opinion is the one we follow when the two Rav Acha and Ravina are disagreeing, and only in these three cases is Rav Acha the lenient one, and the halacha is like him. One of the three cases, Hai Umza the Asmik, a piece of meat that had sort of like a black and blue mark of blood gathered in the muscle. So even though you salted it, it still had sort of this purplish pocket at that spot. Chatre umalche. Sorry. So the Gemara before said, I started a line early. So umtza beyu mizraki pliga bar v'achar that in regards to a piece of meat, in regards to testicles, and in regards to the arteries. So the Gemara now explains what is the machlokas of umtza. So the asmik, it had this red pocket, it's sort of like a black and blue mark. So it had a heavy area of blood. So chatre umalche, if you cut it, you make a slit in that area and then you salt it, so that'll extract the blood. And you can even put it into a pot. Which means that you're not roasting it on the fire to extract the blood. Shafte b'shabude shari. If you put it on a spit, on a kebab, right, on a skewer, so doing it that way, the blood it'll bring the blood out as well. Made of dayiv, and so it's going to be enough with just the regular roasting and a little bit of salt that you put on for roasting. That's going to be enough to get the blood out. Achte agumri, however, if he puts it directly on coals, pliga bar Rav Acha Ravina. So there's a machlokas of Rav Acha Ravina. Chad asav chad shari. One said that it's prohibited, and in this time Ravina is the strict one. Chad shari, and one said that it's permissible, and it's Rav Acha is the lenient. So manda asar. So the one who said that it's prohibited, he says the reason why, if you put it on fire, it's kosher, but if the blood comes out. But if you put it directly on coals, it's going to be prohibited because matzmis tzamis, because the coals touching it sort of singes it and seals it up, and won't let the blood come out. Uman the Shari, and the one who says permissible, Meshav Shaiv, he says no, the fire, the heat, direct heat is still going to extract the blood, suck out the blood, and it's permissible. And the halacha is that you can be lenient and assume that the blood is out and eat it. And so too in regards to the testes. If somebody wants to eat the testicles, if he cuts it in order to salt it, and then salts it, and then puts it in a pot, it's going to be permissible. Talinu b'shpudin, if he just puts it on a spit, on a skewer, so directly on the fire, sharian, that's also going to be permissible because made of dayiv, the blood will just drip out into the fire. Achtinu agumri, but he puts it directly on the coals. So there too, there's a machlokas or Ravina about this. Again, Ravina is more strict in this case. One prohibits, one permits it. And again, the reason is the one that says it's prohibited because it's when it singes it, it sort of seals the outer the outer layer and locks the blood in. And the one that says permissible says no, it'll draw it out. And again, the halacha is going to be that it's permissible. And also the mizraki, which are the arteries in the shchita area, so the jugular. So if he cuts it, so even if he salted it straight, you can put it straight into a pot. He doesn't have to put it directly on fire. Talye b'shapuda, but if he puts it on a spit, on a rotisserie, so there, if if the slit from where he shechted it is lower, so shari, it's going to be permissible because it's made of dayiv, because it's going to run outward that way. Achte agumri, however, he puts it directly on the fire, on the coals. So a plea about Ravacha Ravina, again, Ravacha Ravina disagree about this. Chad also chad shari, as before, one prohibits, one permits. Man the asar matz mitzayim, some is, and the reason the one that says it's prohibited because it singes it and burns the outside, and therefore it's going to lock the blood in. Uman the shari meshav shayv, and the one that says permissible because it draws it out. The halacha is in all three of these that you can eat them directly on the coals because it does draw it out. Now, if somebody took this meat that has pooled blood in one area and the muscles, sort of like a black and blue mark, so chalye, if you put it into either the juices that come out of it when he cuts it, or if you put it into a vinegar, and the vinegar, in order to draw out the blood, and the vinegar turns red, so that's going to be prohibited. Le asmik, however, if it's not red when the juices come out, or the vinegar, so then chalye shari, so what comes out, that the juices are going to be permissible. However, Ravina, who was strict before and said that if you put it directly on coals, it's going to be prohibited. Even if it doesn't turn red, the vinegar is going to be aser anyhow. Because it's impossible that there's no red, some streaks of blood in it. Mar, the son of Amemar, said to the teacher, son of Amemar, said to Ravashi, Abba megameh legemui. My father would drink this vinegar. Ikadamri, Rav Ashi Gufei megameh legemui. Some say that Rav Ashi himself would drink this vinegar. Amalei mar bar Amemar Ravashi Abba haychalat dechalat beichad zibna. If you would put meat in vinegar once in order to draw out the blood, he wouldn't repeat it, use this again to put meat in there to draw out the blood. Maishna What about diluted vinegar, which he would use? Why over here would he not use it? Why is this any worse than a weak vinegar? So the Gemara says, "Hasab isi l'kiyui de pera be'ene." There, the whatever the source of the vinegar, the strength of that fruit is still there. It says, however strong it is, that's what it is, but it's the full strength. Hacha leisi l'kiyui de pera be'ene. Here, it's already been ruined by having it draw out the blood coming out. So he says that's a distinction, and therefore he would not use a vinegar a second time to draw out the blood. We don't use vinegar; we use salt only, and rinse it in water beforehand and after. So we don't have this. It's not a common practice for us, but that's the Gemara in regards to which meats can be roasted on coals in order to extract the bloods, and also the vinegar, whether it's kosher and whether you can reuse it. We're now on Daf Ayin Hey Amid Aleph in the second line. The Mishnah said, "Ein tzolin a Pesach." You cannot use a metal spit as a rotisserie. You also cannot use an askala, which is a grate. Yet it says that the story with Rabbi Gamliel and Tavi Abdai that he had a servant go out and prepare it on an askala. So the Gemara says Maisa Lister. So you have a story in the Mishnah from Rabbi Gamliel that contradicts the ruling right before it. The Gemara says Ksuri Mechzer V'achik Tani. That's because you're missing some of the information which the Mishnah assumed we knew. V'im askala menukeves muter. It said that the Mishnah is talking about different types of askala. There were grates that the animal would sit directly, or the meat would sit directly on the grate, sort of like our grills. And then there's a grate that sort of worked like a rotisserie. So it had on the grate, it had a rod, and that's what it's talking about. That you had the rod or the spit sitting on the grate, but the meat itself wouldn't touch any of the grate, and then it would be permissible. V'amar Rabbi Tzaddik, and to that Rabbi Tzaddik responded, and that's what Rabbi Gamliel told his servant Tavi to go out and put the meat, the korban pesach, on this askala, because it had that hole in the center, or the area open where you could sort of rotisserie this, roast it on using this grate in the center area. The Gemara now is not going to address the part of the Mishnah that says that it has to be heated directly from fire. What counts as fire? And the Gemara is going to start with a question that we had earlier in Masechta. We saw that klipe arla, peels of or shells of arla produce. That's a produce from a tree within the first 3 years of when the tree was planted. That the produce is prohibited, and so and it's not only prohibited to be eaten, but even in benefit. And so you cannot bake a bread that with where the fuel is klipe arla. That's one opinion before. We saw Rebbe's opinion. And so if you did heat an oven this way, however, you've now removed all the heat source. You've removed the heat source, and now you only want to bake something or cook something in the heat that's trapped in this oven. So your oven is built properly, and so even if the fire is out and you've removed all the coals, it's still going to have enough heat that you could cook something in there. And you want to cook something in there, would it also be prohibited on account of that the heat source was something you're not allowed to benefit from, even though that's gone already? Or do we say, no, that's only if it's directly heating from that fuel, but that fuel's gone. And so right now it's just residual heat, and therefore it's permissible. The Gemara says, Rav China Bar Idi asked this question, Rav Ada Bar Ava, and he said, Tanash Isikui Beklipe Arlo. You heated a oven with peels from Arla produce, which means produce in the first 3 years, with Garfa, but he removed the heat source. And now you've baked the bread in there. Now, according to the opinion, it said that if you had baked it with the heat direct from the Kalipi Arla would be prohibited because you're benefiting from the fuel of something that's prohibited in benefit. Earlier, we saw one opinion that said that it doesn't make a difference because by the time the fire is or the heat is coming off of it, it's already been burned, and so it's permissible. But according to Rebbe, who said that over earlier that it was prohibited, what about over here? It does. To answer John, does the question is, does the stored heat, the heat that remains in this oven, it's indirect to the heat source, to the fuel, which is prohibited to benefit from, but it wouldn't be hot without that. So does that count as direct heat or not? Mao Amalei Hapasu Teres. He said that in that case, the bread would indeed be permissible. It does not count as having come from the heat source. Amar lei. So he responded, Amar Bechina Saba, Amar Avasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. But in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, he said, Tanash Zeku of a Garfa, V'tzala Beis HaPesach, Ein Zetz Liesh. But we have a halacha that Rabbi Yochanan said that when our Mishnah says, that the Torah says, really, that it has to be roasted by fire, that if you had done this, you heated an oven with a fire, you put in wood, you lit a fire, the oven temperature went up to, let's say, 1500 Fahrenheit. You took out the heat source, you took out the wood and the fire, and now you put your lamb in there to roast, and it won't be direct to fire, so it's not going to burn it, but it's going to be baked evenly and nicely. It's going to be great. So that maybe that counts as tzli eish. It's roasted by fire, even though it's not directly to the fire. It's indirect from the fire, the heat, the residual heat. He says it's not going to count. That doesn't count tzli eish, but not by logic, not because we know that on its own, or rather, shanema tzli eish tepama, because the Torah said it has to be roasted by a fire twice. So that tells me that it has to really be roasted directly to a fire. Time of the Galar Rachman tzli eish tepabim. So it's only on account that the Torah told me that it has to be roasted by a fire twice. That tells me direct to a fire. But in regards to the shells from Arla produce in the first 3 years that afterwards, the tree was planted, where there you're not allowed to benefit from it, and the Torah doesn't tell me direct or indirect heat. So havamina tzli eshu. So then I should say it does count as tzli esh, as roasted by a fire, because it doesn't have this special exemption or the special teaching that we have by Pesach that tells you that tzli esh has to be directly from the fire and a live open fire. So he responded, well, perhaps we can learn from there. The Torah is not only telling me Pesach has to be tzli esh, roasted by an open fire, but it's telling me by the repetition that anywhere else that the roasting by a fire or baking by a fire would count as from the source. It has to be directly to the fire. And therefore, we're going to say the same in regards to baking the bread by the Arla fuel. Or perhaps hasam time in the kasav rachman tzli eish tepabim, halay kasav rachman tzli eish tepabim havamina eish kapid rachman. The idea is that by Pesach, the Torah says tzli eish twice to tell me that it has to have fire there. And if not, and if and what the Torah requires is that you have the fire directly there, and the heat of the oven is since it's heated by fire, that's going to be sufficient. And therefore, even if you remove the coals, that is roasted by a fire, and it counts as you roasted it by fire because the heat is from a fire. But you can't compare that to the prohibition of benefiting from arla, where that's the fuel. That's not the fire itself. That's the fuel of the fire. That's the wood for the fire. And that's what you're not allowed to benefit from, and that's not there anymore. So in this second response, he says, the distinction is clear. But the Torah doesn't say you have to, it has to be roasted by the fuel. It has to be roasted by the fire, meaning the fire is what caused the heat. So if not for the Torah repeating tzli eish twice, and I wouldn't know that it has to be that the fire is live. It could be that just the heat of the fire is there, and anything that is roasted in there, even though the fire is gone, it will all be heat from fire, and that's sufficient. That's why the Torah had to repeat it. But in regards to arla, it has nothing to do with the fire. It has everything to do with the fuel. And there, once the fuel's gone, it'll be permissible. Now the Gemara is going to enter a conversation about whether or not coals also count as fire. And the Gemara is going to make a distinction between what kind of coals. When we think of coals, we think of charred wood, but you can have heated glowing metal as well. He cut the meat, not cut it up into pieces, but he slit the meat really to allow the heat into the meat, and then it'll roast evenly. And he put it directly on coals instead of roasting it on a sort of like rotisserie style on over fire. He put it directly on the coals. So Rabbi Omer Anish is etzli. Rabbi says, in my opinion, this counts as roasted by fire. Ramile Rav Achdabai Barami Rav Chisda. So Rav Achdabai Barami asked Rav Chisda, Mi Amar Rabbi Gecholim Eshnenu. Is it really the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi that coals count as actually fire? And when the Torah said Tzli has to be roasted by fire, that this counts as fire? For a minute, we ask a contradiction. So the quick introduction to this question, to this halacha that we're going to ask a question from, is in regards to tzaras, what we call leprosy. Somebody has a nega tzaras, a blemish of tzaras, leprosy. So there are various halachas in regards to them, and one of them is the basis of a mikveh that has a burn, and that develops into a tzaras. The Torah says that if it is a michvas eish, if it was burnt of a fire, so and then develops in tzaras, it's going to be a nega tzaras, and that would count as a certain type of a full-fledged nega, blemish or wound of tzaras. So ainli ella shenichva be'esh. By the words of the Torah, it says michvas eish, burnt by a fire. I would think it has to be directly or actually burnt by a fire. What about nichva begacheles beremetz besid bereseach begafsis reseach? What happens if it was burnt by a coal or by remetz? Remetz is really ash, hot. The ash itself is still hot. It has embers in it, but it's not actually a coal. Besid reseach, with hot lime or plaster. Gafsis reseach, same. So other very hot elements. Or anything that would come from hot fire. Or hot water, boiled water that was heated by fire. So what about any other type of burn? Minayin, how do you know that even that counts as a mikveh, as a burn from which this nega would come? Mikveh riba. It says mikveh to burn, a burn, to tell you that it says a burn multiple times to tell you that any type of burn, it doesn't have to be directly from fire. It's the time of the Rabbi Rahman. So it's only on account of that the Torah, the specifics of that halacha is not the question. The question is what the Brisa taught us. The Torah, when it said michvas eish, burnt by fire, we would think it means burnt by fire directly, and a coal would not be included in that. And it's only on account of that we have a second time the Torah says a burn, but it includes coals and everything else. But time of the Rabbi Rahman mikveh, it's only because we have the superfluous, the extra word burn. But if the Torah had not added and told us specifically by saying burn a second time, mikveh, in order to tell us that other types of heat are included, then I would not have included coals with fire, but rather I would say coals are exempt, just as hot water and hot ash, etc., are exempt. He says, no, you have to make a distinction. If it's a wood coal, where that's coming from the heat source itself, and it's a fuel to the fire, so that really is a part of the fire. That would not need an extra verse. So what did the Brisa mean when it said you need a verse to tell you that coals are included? That's not a fuel for fire, but rather a red hot rod of metal, piece of metal, where that is not the same as fire. It's not eish, but it does get red hot. And for that, I would think that doesn't count as fire, and that's why you need a special teaching. So the Gemara now gets into another place where we find that red hot metal does count as fire. The Gemara says, wait, so you're telling me that coals of metal, meaning red hot metal, does not count as fire? In this maiden that was married and had an affair, where the Torah says be'esh tisarif, that her capital punishment is through fire. V'amar of Masa said that you don't actually burn her, but rather psila shel ever ha'yosela. This is the early form of lethal injection. They would take red hot lead and they would pour it down her throat. That would be the form of execution. Shiny. So why do you count that as fire? Gemara says shiny hasam namakra be'esh tisarif. Since it says tisarif, burn her. It's any type of killing her through heat. Tisarif l'rabis kol streifas habayis min ha'esh. Anything that comes from fire. V'kolshkein heish atzma. And for sure, fire itself, but any type. So Gemara says, so why don't we actually do a burning at the stake? Why don't we just wrap this person with fuel and burn them? We actually learned it from the children of Aaron. It says in regards to the children of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, who died when they brought a foreign fire into the inauguration service of the Mishkan. It says, "Kol Beis Yisrael yisrafru yivku es asreif asher saraf Hashem." They're all, everybody should cry for the burning of the children of Aaron. Now, Malahal and Sreifas Neshama, and over there, their bodies were intact. Their souls had been burned. V'guf kaim, their bodies were intact. Afkan Sreifas Neshama v'guf kaim. So too over here, we don't burn the body, but rather the innards, the soul. And over there we see that because it says that they removed with their clothing the children of Aaron. So you see they didn't burn on the outside. Rather it was, as Rashi says here, the Gemara says elsewhere, two bolts of lightning came and hit them sort of in their nostrils, and they expired. So in any case, the question stands: why over there do we consider Aish fire, Sreifa fire, metal counts? And the Gemara says, so why don't we do hot water? Why don't you pour hot water on her? Mishum the Rabbi Nachman. On the basis of Rabbi Nachman, Rabbi Nachman says, the Torah says, and you shall love your fellow as yourself, even someone who is a convicted of a capital crime. You have to seek out the nicest way of fulfilling that particular execution. So even in execution, you seek the least cruel form of execution. And so over here also, boiling water is more painful, and so you don't do that. Okay, so so if we have the teaching of Rav Nachman that tells us that that you have to seek out the best, the nicest form of, or the least cruel form of execution. So why do we need the teaching of Rav Nachman that says that we learn from the children of Aaron to tell you that this counts as burning? We wouldn't burn the body like that anyhow, because it's more painful and not as nice a form of execution. Amri, well, it still has to fit the form that the Torah gives, which is sreifa, burning. So I need to know that this counts as burning if the body remains intact, and so therefore it's just burning the innards or burning the soul. So how would you know that something else that's like that, that like this early form of lethal injection, how do you know that would work? So therefore we need to say the comparison to the children of Aaron, we see the counts as sreifa. Once we know the counts as sreifa, we're looking for within that the nicest or the least cruel form of capital punishment. Because if it was just the teaching of Rav Nachman that do it in the nicest way, then you could just make it quick with a fire, but actually a burning fire. The Thomas Bagala says she should die quickly, but not that you would actually circumvent what the Torah says, which is burning. So therefore, we have to learn that it's burning kamashmala. So if that's the case, ve'ela be'esh lamali. So why do we need the word be'esh with fire? To tell you that if it had just been molten, so would explosion count as fire? I'm not sure what that means, John.
How about electric?
Yeah, I mean, usually any kind of explosion, some kind of explosive device, the way that it works is it creates a lot of fire real fast.
Right.
So would that count?
For what?
As fire.
For execution?
Yeah.
That's a North Korean question, but yes, I think it would count as fire. It wouldn't count as v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, being kind to the choosing the best form of a bad situation, the best form of execution. It would obviously that wouldn't be nice, or that would be cruel, and that wouldn't be the least cruel possible, but it would fulfill the fire. The fire.
I mean, compared to other types of burning, it would be the fastest thing.
Right, but the Gemara says we're not looking.
Least.
Right, we're not looking only for fast. We're looking for also what may be considered nicer or less cruel.
I think what we're struggling here is molten lead down the gullet doesn't sound so kind and gentle.
No death sounds kind and gentle. That's the problem. We're not. That's why I keep on correcting myself. We say the nicest, and I correct myself to say the least cruel, because capital punishment is not nice. I mean, it's
how about electrocution?
Well, perhaps
Would that be better than molten lead?
Yeah, I don't know if they were able to do that back then. Yeah, say.
No, I mean, the Sanhedrin gets reestablished and we start executing.
Well, ask the Sanhedrin at that point, but um,
No, but that's
I'm
the
not
point-
going to
but that's
venture into whether lethal injection or electrocution would work. But the concept the Gemara is saying is that when the Torah poorly done electrocution can turn into fire. Yes, that's as unfortunately known to have happened. The concept the Gemara is saying is that when the Torah said fire, it didn't mean specifically in order to fire, like a burning at the stake. The idea is that the death penalty that this person has, the capital punishment has to be done through a heat medium, a fire medium, but it doesn't have to be directly fire. And we learn from the children of Aaron that when the soul expires but the body is intact, that still counts as sreifa, as having died by burning, and perhaps that would count even if it wasn't. So maybe electrocution would count. We can venture into that, but what the Gemara is talking about is that we don't need actual fire. Hot molten lead or hot molten metals would count as well. And what the Gemara is saying is the reason it didn't use other hot things is because it's seeking the quickest, least painful, the least cruel form of execution.
So that's
poisoning.
That's what I'm trying to come up with. What I'm asking is the halacha we use molten lead dafka, or is the halacha whatever the best means possible to affect, and that could be discussed by the Sanhedrin, but whatever the best means possible to affect this misa be'esh, that's what we will do. Or is it no, we've already decided that we're doing it with lead?
No, I think that the latter is correct. That it's something that the Gemara is seeking. The halacha is seeking seek the nicest form, and that would be something the Sanhedrin would take up. It's not the first subject matter I'm looking at. Exactly what type of capital punishment it will be. But yes, that concept, I think in the Gemara, just for the learning's sake, I think what you're asking is the Gemara saying it's got to be with lead, and how did we get there? Or I think it's more that the Gemara is saying we get it. We're looking for something that fits the criteria, but the nicest form, and we're looking for the least cruel and unusual punishment. And John, you asked the question as well. What was that?
I was wondering if poison is,
I've thought of that before, because the Torah calls poison sreifa, burning. The Torah calls that in regards to the snakes that bit. The Torah says that they had burnt them, and there was obviously a poison. The poisonous snake. So we see that it is called sreifa, and in the Gemara for sure it's called that. So
there's so many poisons now that are so fast and so undetectable or so painless. It would seem to me, if you're looking for something that's going to cause the soul to expire, but doesn't physically damage the body, that would qualify.
Correct. I don't know how if we need to get into that conversation right now. I'm not sure it would fit the bill of be'esh, of fire, but definitely that question has entered my mind. Would it count as sreifa? In any case, the requirement of halacha is the least cruel. Even if this is a condemned person, we still have to love them and care for them as ourselves, and choose the most respectable or the least painful form of execution. So what you're telling me is that every time it says burn with fire, it means any type of burning that comes through fire. Well, if that's true, in regards to the offerings in the Beis Hamikdash, bulls that are burned after they are brought as an atonement offering. It says over there, you will burn them on wood, the offering. You will burn the offering on wood, the carbon, ba'esh, with fire. And there we say it has to be specifically fire. Not in molten, not in heated lime, etc. How can you compare the two? If there it says with fire, you will burn it. So we learn from there anything that comes from Eish, because it ends with burn it, so that tells you the burning is the main thing, even if it's not directly from fire. But over here, by the bull that's brought as an atonement, that it says you burn it on fire, it starts off with burning it, and it says on wood with fire. So lebesayf Eish lememra, the Eish in midachrin eled, it ends with fire to tell you that only fire, nothing else. And I said, wait, but there also it then repeats itself and says, and you that it gets burned. Hasam namik siva sreifel besayf techsifer. It says, when we turn to Ayin Hamid base, al shefach hadeshen yisarif, on the ash pile you will burn it, or not the ash pile, the place where you pour the ash, you will burn it. So Amri hahu yisarif mibayles. You're right. That where it repeats that you will burn it is to tell you something else. It's there to teach you another teaching. Yisaref, you need to burn it in that spot, even if the ash pile is not there. Yisaref, and it burn it in that spot. Or baruba, and you have to burn it completely, even if it's already mostly caught on fire. It's not sufficient. You have to wait for it to burn completely. Ravina responds to the original question, which said, we had said that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi said that coals count. If you put the carbon pesach on coals directly, counts as burning, as having roasted it by fire. But in regards to the burn that turned into a leprosy, a negat saras, there the Brisa had said first, if it was burnt by a fire, perhaps only by a fire, not by a coal, etc., a coal, hot lime, etc. To which you say, no, we put it all together. So he actually changes the wording of the Brisa. Perhaps only with a coal or with fire. So coal and fire are the same. What about any other form of heat that comes from fire, whether heated lime, etc., or hot water from fire? So there, the addition of word of mikveh, a burn, to tell you any type of burn, but where actually the Brisa puts fire and coal together, so that's not a contradiction to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Indeed, coals are considered fire, and therefore roasting your Pesach on coals would count on fire. Tomorrow we'll continue this discussion. Wishing you all a great day.